We're a pretty tight-knit family because it's just the three of us. We've always wanted to serve, and for some reason, we all ended up in Grow Zone. We decided that that's what we're going to do with our family so that we can all grow closer to God and grow our faith together. So I definitely feel like serving here as a family makes it home to us. In Grow Zone, I am the 4-year-old leader in one of the classrooms, and Carissa, my daughter, she volunteers with me. I love to see God working in her, and I love to see how she portrays that to the kids in Grow Zone.
I love helping my mom, watching her actually leading these kids. It's really great. Serving with my dad, seeing him around little kids is really fun for me.
Serving here as a family actually draws us closer together because we see certain parts of each other that we hadn't seen before. I love seeing my daughter grow in that sense. The same with my wife being a leader, and they're learning from you.
When you see Marvin, he'll always have a smile on his face. I've seen him grow. He's opened up more. I've seen Carissa grow through Grow Zone. She is opening up more herself.
I really appreciate how much my parents have pushed me, and it's just made my anxiety go down a little bit more. I'm able to get myself out there without having to think it over 10 times through before I actually do it. I feel like we've grown closer as a family, just that we have more to talk about.
After serving, on the ride home, or we go out for a brunch or whatever, we have conversations about it. It keeps the unity there.
It doesn't matter. We're volunteering as long as we're doing it as a family.
I really truly believe a family that prays together stays together.
That's kind of how I feel about this. A family that volunteers and serves God together is going to stay together. And we feel like serving here as a family makes Port City feel like home to us.
And that's so good. I love hearing that story. Octavia, Martin, Carissa. Thank you guys. I don't know, are y'all maybe in here? Or serving at 9? Yep, maybe not. So thank you guys for sharing your story, and not only sharing your story, but also for serving in Grow Zone, right? I know all the moms and dads of preschoolers are really grateful for Grow Zone, right? Yes, it's like hero work. I'm so, I love that story because that's kind of my story as well. Obviously, I get to participate in Port City in a little bit different way than a lot of people do. But nevertheless, this has been how our family has been impacted. Both of my daughters, my wife, all of us have volunteered in all kinds of different places. And my daughters particularly were volunteers in Tsunami, and then my youngest daughter volunteered in Grow Zone. And the relationships and the people that poured into them as a part of being a part of that were immeasurable in their influence and their help on my kids in their formative years, and really learning how to both walk with God, but also how to live that out by serving other people in different ways. And so it's an incredibly powerful way for you to be involved, for those of you who are on the edge. And also I think it's just appropriate to take a moment to everyone who volunteers and gives your time to serve our church in that way, or in any way. I just want to say thank you to you guys from the bottom. I'm so grateful and appreciative for what you guys do. Now today we're continuing our series called Welcome Home, and we want for this place to feel like it's a place where you can call home, a place where you can not only feel comfortable enough to kick your feet up, right, and use the refrigerator or get some out of the refrigerator, but we also want you to feel comfortable enough to take out the trash, right? There's some responsibility that goes along with it. And so today I'm going to talk about sort of the house rules, what we expect and what we believe. So this will be really easy because you can just sit here and go, I'm not a part of Port City, and then you're off the hook. You don't have to do anything. But if you're considering it, this is what we expect, what we long for, what we want to be. And so these are sort of our house rules. Now, how many of you guys, whenever you start in a project, whether it's like, a toy that you have to put together, or some kind of furniture you bought from IKEA or whatever, that you open up the box and the first thing you do is you grab the instructions and you begin to read them? Anybody like instruction people? Like there's like 6 of us. The rest of you guys, you could save yourselves a lot of stress and a lot of yelling at people around you if you literally just read the instructions. It'll change everything. So that's free. It has nothing to do with the message. But part of what I learned is when my kids were born, kids do not come with instructions. Did y'all know this? So I was 24 years old when my daughter was born. And I remember leaving the hospital with her in the car seat, looking at the nurses thinking, you have no idea what you're doing sending her home with me because I'd never held a baby before. I knew nothing about this. And so luckily my wife knew a lot more than I did, but in my mind, I'm trying to understand what I've got myself into and what I'm gonna do about this and how is it that you raise a kid. And so we began this process when our kids were small, and I've shared stories like this before, but really trying to understand what are the ground rules for our kids? Like what are the house rules? What are the things that our kids need to know in order to exist in our house with a measure of sanity and eventually responsibility and all of those other things. And so I sat down on an index card and I came up with 4 rules. And these are the 4 rules that we raised our kids with. So if you're like a preschool parent, you might want to write this down. This will be super helpful for you. But there were 4 simple rules that we adopted in our house. These became our house rules. Number 1 is you respect everyone. That was rule number 1. You always respect everyone. I don't care who it is. I do not want to hear my 5-year-old talking back to an adult. I certainly want to hear my 13-year-old talking back to an adult. You respect everyone. That was just ground rule. Respect that piece of cake. Respect everyone. Rule number 2, you be grateful for everything. Because you have nothing, you bring nothing, you offer nothing, so everything you have has been given to you, right? That's what so be grateful for it. You have to learn how to cultivate gratitude, to be grateful for what you have received, what you're receiving, what you're the recipient of. So respect everyone and be grateful for everything. Number 3 is never lie. Never, 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 never lie. Do you know why? We taught our kids this. Do you know why you never lie? People say, oh, because you're always supposed to tell the truth. No, that's not why you never lie. You never lie because if you lie, I can't help you. If you lie to me, if you withhold from me, you rob yourself of what you are going to most need, which is someone else's entering in and helping you. Never lie. And then number 4 was never whine. Do you know why? Just because I couldn't take it. It's like, that's it, just never whine. So respect everyone, be grateful for everything, never lie, and never whine. Those became the house rules. Now here's what happens. There were other kinds of rules like curfews and all the things that kind of unfold from that, but it was always driving back to these things. And what we never wanted to do was to turn into where we were the rule police. No parent wants to do that. No parent wants to be the rule enforcer in every situation. At some point in time, you want the rules to sort of begin to dissipate and be replaced by something else. You want for them to actually grow up and be able to act in the way that you hope they will act and want them to act and call them to act. You want the relationship, right, to sort of overtake the rules. And what happens is, and this is really the point, the point of this is that we want our house rules to become sort of to give way to the culture in our home. We never wanted to always be the rule enforcers. We always wanted to leverage these rules or the things we're asking to build a culture in our home, to build a way in which we operated relationally with one another. And what happens is, over the years, those sort of ground rules gave way to something else in our home. We had a rallying cry around our home, which was the rallying cry of have fun, enjoy everything. That became a part. Hard days, good days, homework. Learn how to enjoy things. Learn how to enjoy the hard things. Learn how to enjoy the good things, to receive these things. And now if you ask my kids what kind of the mantra of our family has become over the last 5 or 6 years, then it's a lot easier when your kids are out of the house, I suppose. But now what they'll tell you is the rule in our household is there's always a reason to celebrate. And this is what we live by all the time. It's become a culture in our home. And part of the reason is because it's rule, but part of the reason because I'm married to sunshine, which is a whole other message. But my point is that when we talk about, most of us, when we talk about the rules of being involved in the church, you think it's a list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots. You think it's a list of expectations that you're supposed to believe the right things or obey and do the right morality, the right positions on the right issues. And that's not what I'm talking about. At some point, all those things have to give way to the way in which we learn to interact with one another. And it's complicated because you have a large church. It's complicated because you have a diverse church. It's complicated because everybody doesn't think like you and everybody doesn't think like me. It's complicated. It requires something of us. It actually requires something of us that we do not innately possess, which is where the gospel comes in. because he gives it to us and he grants it to us, and we receive that, and from that place we operate with one another, distinctly different than the world. And if you've been here for the last couple of weeks, you've seen me draw this. There's these two circles. Then in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it was a place where he would dwell, where on earth as it is in heaven was done instinctively, because that's how we were created to be. But sin entered, and it separated these two things. It separated us from the life that God had called us to. And so now we're left to live in this world where on earth as it is in heaven is simply a prayer, has become a prayer. And this place in which we live, and we said this last week, and we'll talk more about this next week, but that it's governed, ruled by the law, governed by fear and pride. And we're going to address this a little bit more detail next week. But what God has done in the church, in who we are, what he has done is he has called us out. We've talked about this the last couple weeks. He is calling us out of the world. He is calling us out of the world in order to shape us. And so he has created a place where he would reside, where on earth as it is in heaven has become a real thing. And as in you and I, he is calling us out of the world to form us, to shape us, to cause us to look more like he is and to bear his image and his influence on the world. But then he also sends us back. He sends us back into the world with redemptive activity. We were just talking this week, you've heard me talk about surrender intervals, where you have to surrender sometimes momentarily as you breathe. This idea of being called out and sent back, and called out and sent back is sort of the same thing. Some of you are in conversations, or you're about to enter into a meeting, or you're about to have some kind of discussion with someone. What you need to do is you need to pull away. You need to be withdrawn from the world. You need to take a breath and align yourselves with the way of life under the rule of God's love, to align yourself with the way of Jesus so that you enter back into that place and you offer something better. How many circumstances have you been in? How many times have you gotten sucked into something where what you offered wasn't helpful, or it didn't provide hope? It actually undermined, or it cut, or it was condescending, or it was sarcastic. What if we could pull away and then enter back in with something better? That's the picture of the church. So we have been called out and then sent back into the world with this redemptive activity. And we've talked about this over the last couple of weeks, this idea in Ephesians. And he talks about that we are no longer foreigners, we are no longer strangers, that we instead now we live as the family of God. We live as a place where we are together under his name, or in his name and under his name. And that we are building on a foundation that has been laid for us, and that foundation is ultimately Christ Jesus. We talked about it a couple weeks ago, that we rest on him. It's interesting in this room, I don't know, that we've talked about this idea of the world being shaken. The Bible actually gives us a picture of this later on in the book of Hebrews. And it says that God has shaken the world in order to reveal the things that are unshakable. That as the world is shaken to pieces, the thing that remains is that which is unshakable, and that's his kingdom. It's in Hebrews. It's a profoundly pointed passage. And so he tells us, though, that we are his family, that we are here for this reason, that we are being joined together, and we are being built together, and it rises up. We become a place where we become God's presence here in this world, where we become this place where God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven. And there were two things we said last week that were important. This is a place where he resides, where his presence meets us. And I think we think about this collectively. Obviously, it happens individually, but it also happens collectively. Something happens when we're together. And it's a place where he has authority, where he rules. So both of these things happen, and then we are sent out into the world as a formative community with redemptive activity. And what I want to do today is I want to focus on what it means for us to be a formative community. And the next week, I'm going to talk about what it means to engage in the world with redemptive activity, how we bring better things to the world around us. In the Gospel of Matthew, and this is where I want to land. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16 is a place where Jesus is sort of right before he predicts his death and begins his journey to the cross, and he's wildly popular. He's healed people. The Pharisees, the religious rulers, the political rulers are all on edge about Jesus and sort of this radical message he's teaching and all the sort of chaos that he's created in first century Palestine. And so there's a lot of buzz, a lot of rumors about Jesus. It's interesting that what you kind of see is not any different than it is today, where everybody kind of has an opinion about everything. And so Jesus gets them together and he says, hey guys, what are the rumors about me? What are the opinions about me? Who do people say that I am? Who do people say that I am? And so the disciples, you can imagine, they're sitting there, they're going, some people say you're John the Baptist. We know he got his head cut off, but some people say you're like John the Baptist come back. Oh yeah, well, I've heard that you're Elijah. Some people say you're Elijah. Oh, I've heard some people say you're Elvis. And I'm just kidding, that's probably not true. But they're just speculating and talking about all these things that people are saying. You can only imagine the rumors that would have circulated around Jesus. And so Jesus is like, what's the lay of the land? What are people saying about me? And they're giving him all these answers. And then Jesus turns and he flips it into a more personal question. And he says, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? This is really important for all of us who are gathered here and who are listening, who are paying attention to this. Because at some point you have to decide, you have to choose what you believe and what you think, not just about God and Jesus and the gospel, but about everything. You have to choose what you believe is your role in the world around you. You have to choose what you believe about what you are to do with what is happening in the world around you. You have to choose what you believe about the way you're going to engage in the relationships that you have, that are available to you, that are still in front of you, or the relationships that you have. Who do you say? What do you say? One of the things that's happened to us in our culture, especially with like Twitter and Instagram, is what we do is we usually get a factoid about something and then we use that as our beliefs about it. So when someone says, what do you think about this? You quote someone else, or you quote a post that you saw, or you quote a book that you read, or you quote a pastor that you heard. And people do this to me all the time. I'll ask them, I say, hey, here's what we're dealing with. What do you think about this? And they'll say, oh, so-and-so said this. I'm like, I don't care what so-and-so said. I care what you think about what so-and-so said. Can we talk about that? Does that make sense? We get so accustomed to using everyone else's beliefs and ideas and sound bites as our own without ever letting them shape us. And the formative part comes when you begin to think about what you think about it, when you begin to think about what you believe about it. What do you say? I've been saying, it's so funny, I was looking back in 2018, I preached a message talking about this new thing that God was doing. And we had a hurricane, and then we had a pandemic, and then who knows what. I'm like, I'm gonna stop talking about this. Because I sensed, and I still do, that things are changing. The church is changing. And it's changing in ways that I think are beautiful and redemptive. In fact, I'm more hopeful than I've ever been. I'm thankful that my theological box, I talked about last week, has been demolished. And there is something that I'm seeing that I've been more encouraged and compelled by the beauty of the gospel than at any point in my life. And I hope that you'll be able to sense that and see that. But they started because I started asking questions about, what do I say? Who do I believe that Jesus is? What do I believe about these things? And so this is what each of us need to do. And so here's what we have recorded. Simon Peter speaks up and he says this, who do you say I am, Jesus said. And Simon Peter answered them, verse 16, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. This is we miss this because we have kind of heard it in church world. This was a radical statement of authority and allegiance and competition with Caesar. And in Rome, in Roman oppression, the Jewish state or the Jewish nation underneath Roman oppression, there was no other king but Caesar. This was the kind of stuff that gets you killed. And he says, you are the Christ, you are the King, you are the Lord. You are the one that we have been waiting for. You are the one who has come to redeem. You are the Christ, the Son of the God whom we all worship and believe. It was a very powerful, very stark confession that Peter made. And then here's how Jesus responds. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood. You didn't get this by thinking about it. You didn't get this by logic, but rather it was my Father in heaven who revealed this to you. This came to you. You saw something. You encountered something. And so there's this really pivotal moment here. And then Jesus goes on, he says, I tell you that you are Peter. And the English language doesn't do it quite as justice because he's basically like, hey, Simon Peter, you're now Rocky. You're now the rock, right? And, Peter's the first one to say who can smell what the rock is cooking, but just, no one gives him credit for that, but that's what he actually said. I'm just kidding. And so he calls him Petros, or rock. He says, I tell you that you are now Peter, you are now the rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, some versions say the gates of hell, will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom. We're going to talk about the gates of Hades and the keys to the kingdom next week. But he says, I tell you that you are Petros, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And the question is, what is the rock upon which Jesus is going to build his church on? And it's a question we all have to decide. If you grew up in the Catholic Church, what the Catholic Church teaches is that this is where they derive sort of papal authority. This is where the Pope comes in, that Peter was established as the first Pope by Jesus in this moment. And that from his line, his reign, Peter was the head of the church, and that on that rock of Peter, on the Pope, on that central position, the rest of the church will be built. And that's why in Catholic theology, the Pope speaks with the authority of God, and he adds to because it's on that foundation he's built. Okay? Now, I'm not trying to make any commentary or any critiques or anything on any other theology or Catholic. You grew up that way, that's fine. There's nothing any more than just saying this is where it comes from. I do not hold that position. And what you've got to decide is, what do you believe about that? What foundation is Jesus building on? Is he building it on the guy, Peter, and that sort of descendancy from that? Or is he building on something else? What is the rock that Jesus is building his church on? What I believe, and we've talked about this before, when Jesus says, on this rock, that rock is the confession. It's the declaration that Jesus is Lord. That's the rock upon which his church is built. So what happens is the foundation for this movement isn't about a central place in some place or even a person. It's a foundation. It's a movement that rests on the foundation of those who have been reconciled to the Father. It's those it's on the confession that we have declared Jesus as Lord, that he has done what he says he is going to do. And in him, we have been restored and reconciled to the relationship that we were made. And the foundation of this movement becomes we live as his children, as his people who are reconciled to the Father. And how did we get to be his people? We've looked at this the last couple of weeks, 1 Peter chapter 2. It says, once you were not a people, and now you are a people. Why? Because once you had not received mercy, and now you have received mercy. I keep driving this home because I want you to understand that you do not get to belong to God because you believe the right things, live the right way, ascribe to the right sort of doctrines. You get to belong to God because you receive what he has offered. That's it. And what you do, this isn't just intellectual assent. This is to receive in such a way that, to take hold of this in such a way that it takes over. That's the picture, that we so drink this in, we so receive this in ourselves, that we are shaped and formed and changed. It takes over, that we now live as though he is actually our king and he gets to govern everything about us. That's what I'm talking about. We get to be his people because of that. And so with that comes some responsibilities, some things that you and I need to understand and need to know. And so for this, I'm going to give you sort of our expectations. We were starting the church back in 1999. It was terrifying because we weren't affiliated with any denominations or anything else. We were just starting a church from scratch, which meant you had a blank sheet of paper, which meant that nothing got to be on that paper unless we wrote it down. Like even services. It's like, well, what are we going to do? We're going to have a service. All right, when? I don't know. Should it be on Sunday? Perhaps. So we'll pick a day. And you just have to because otherwise it's not going to happen unless you do. That's a very scary thing. I was 29 years old. I looked like I was 11. And so we have 20 people, 20 adults in a living room, a couple high school students. And when they're talking, think of this, I look like I'm 11. So I'm like, we're going to start this church and it's gonna make a difference in Wilmington. They're like, oh, okay. And you're trying to convince yourself of that as much as anybody else. And so I remember kind of wrestling with them. We did so many dumb things trying to figure this out. But back in 1999, I sat down and began to make a list of the kind of people, of what I wanted to happen in the lives of the people who came to be a part of Port City Community Church. Port City Community Church was not even a thing. No one even knew what Port City Community Church was except this small group of people in a living room. And in fact, I think I've told this story before, but it's kind of worth telling again. In 1999, we were getting ready to have our first service. And so we had rented Roland Grice Middle School, which is in Midtown in Wilmington. It's an old middle school. It seats about 720 people. So we had about 20 people at the time. So you can imagine how that would be, like 20 people in a 720-seat auditorium. This was going to be really fun. We rented the auditorium. We were really excited about our first service. And we picked October the 18th, 1999, to hold our first service at Port City Community Church. We were so excited. We had sent out no emailer. There wasn't any email at the time. We sent out no mailing. We sent out nothing. There was no Instagram, no nothing. So no one really knew except the 20 people we had invited. And we were going to double our attendance because all of our family was going to show up from out of town. So this would be pretty awesome. We were super excited. We got everything set up. We were all ready to go, had the date, had the time. And about Tuesday, Wednesday, they started predicting that Hurricane Irene was going to come through and wreck our plans for the weekend. So we were all staying together in a house, and we're sitting there, and we actually sent all of our family back to Atlanta and different places because we were evacuating. So this is Saturday. Now we had to decide what to do. We said, well, we're going to just postpone our services. Now what we could have done is just called everybody on the phone and said, hey, we're not having our services tomorrow. We'll do it next week. We decided it'd be much more fun to call the news. So here's why. If you've ever seen them, this is, again, before Instagram, there would be a little ticker that comes across, like the show, and it would tell you all the cancellations. And so we called them and said, hey, Port City Community Church has canceled its services tomorrow. They said, okay, perfect, we'll put it on the scroll. So we're all sitting around waiting, and sure enough, it shows up. It's like this school system's closed and this school system, and then it says, Port City Community Church is evacuated. We're like, yay, because it's the first time we'd ever seen like our name anywhere. So we're super excited. So in that this explains a lot, right? One of the things that I had worked on was trying to think of God, what kind of church are we supposed to be? And what it centered on wasn't how many people would come, right? When Jesus said he's going to build his church, he wasn't talking about how many people are going to come or how big the buildings are. He was talking about what kind of people the church is going to produce. What kind of people are we going to become because we are a part of this thing that God has invited us into? And so I sat down and I made a list. And because this was the 90 and you always used acrostics, I wrote this acrostic down, R-E-A-L. And I said I wanted us to be real people. And then I began to ask, what do I want each person to be? What do I want? What do I want to happen in the lives of the people who come to Port City Community Church? I said I want them to have a relationship with Christ. I want them to be engaged in community. I want them to be active in service. I want them to leverage their lives for God's glory, leverage their lives for his purposes. Over the years, the church has grown. Obviously, would get invited a lot of times to go, or pastors would call me and go, Mike, how did you get your church to grow? How did you get it to get big? And what I would always ask them, as I would say, don't ask, how do you get people to come to your church? Ask, what do you want to have happen in the lives of the people who come? Because if you don't answer that question first, you probably have no business inviting them to show up in the first place. If you want to attract a crowd, be a country music star, right? That's what you should do. If you want to build a church, you build that because we have been reconciled to the Father based on what we have received from him. That is a much more difficult, a much higher and more profound call that God has given to us. And in fact, what I believe, it's what the world is actually longing for right now. This is what we get to be. So here's what I want you to do. This is sort of our expectations. This is what I expect for each person who's a part of Port City. There's a difference between what I expect of you in order to be a part and what I expect of you because you are a part. Does that make sense? These aren't expectations that if you check all these boxes, you get to belong. These are expectations that if you belong, right, the invitation is to come first. If you belong, we expect these things will happen. I expect your formation, for you to change, for you to find purpose and meaning and wholeness and health. I expect that because that's what Jesus does. That's what we're talking about. So I'm gonna put these on the board, or on the screen. You can take a picture of them, write them down. We'll be posting these in different places. But our hope, our expectation for you is that you have a relationship with Christ. We want every person to have a personal relationship with Christ. I want for you to have a personal relationship with Christ. I want you to live in such a way that you find an independent dependence on Jesus Christ, that you learn how to walk with him intimately, receiving and trusting. Do you instinctively know how to do that because you come to church? No, you don't. We have to help one another do that. But that's what we want for you. Some of you are here and you don't know what it means to have a relationship with Christ. We want to introduce you to that because what we believe, if you stay here long enough, if you get swept up into what God is doing, you are going to develop a personal relationship with him. It's imperative for each of us to have that, to tend to that, to cultivate that, to live in that. Number two is to engage in community. We want every person to be vitally connected to Port City Community Church, to the body of Christ. I don't just want you to show up and attend. I don't just want you to sign up for Grow Zone, which we do. I want you to be vitally connected. I want there to be like life exchange. It's not just what you get from here, it's what you bring back, it's what you offer, it's what we become because you offer yourselves. We want you to be vitally connected. And the only way that you get vitally connected is not because you join a church. We don't even do membership here, and this is why. Because it doesn't really mean anything. People sign a piece of paper for all kinds of reasons. We want you to be safely within the care of this community. We want you to be known and loved and find a space where you are safely within the care so that if you pull away, there's something that comes with you and with us, from us. It's a vital connection. This isn't because we're trying to be a cult or because we just believe that the redemption of this world does not happen without relationships, without deep relationships. And for that, you've got to engage in community. Number three is we want you to be active in service. We want for every person to have a sense of shared ownership, a sense of shared responsibility for our church. I'll tell you the days of being able to show up and be entertained and hope that the church will be here 10 or 15 years from now are gone. If we don't take ownership and responsibility for this particular church, it will not make it to the next generation. I'm not exaggerating. It will not happen. We have to own this. We have to feel a sense of shared responsibility. To serve means you do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. To serve means you give yourself for whatever happens to be in front of you. When we used to do, we used to do spiritual gift exercise, we'd have someone come in and says, hey man, I've been a pastor at this church. I've got 27 years of experience in this ministry and I've done this and written this book and whatever. It's like, great, you're gonna be a security in Grow Zone. Why? Because that's what we need done. That's what we need. We want you to do your gifts, but we have to learn how to serve. We have to learn how to give ourselves for one another at every turn. And then last, we want to leverage our lives. We want every person, I want every single one of you to experience the fullness of God's calling on your life. Do you know why? So we get all our volunteer positions filled and we don't have any problems as a church. That's why. No. Because that's where you find fullness and freedom. That's where you actually find what you're looking for. If I've learned anything in my life, it is this. I can assure you, I did not ask for this. I wanted to be an architect. I tell God that all the time. Hey, you did this, not me. But I'll tell you what I've learned is in following him and cultivating a relationship and learning how to avail myself to him. And now I'm in this season where I feel like I'm finally starting to avail myself for others in ways they're starting to learn this. My theological box has gotten broken and now I'm beginning to look towards the future. And what I feel and what I sense is unbelievably compelling and worthy of whatever I have to do, right, to sort of experience it, to find it. I look at what happens on Tuesday nights, hundreds of college students in here. I look at what happens down in ripple effect and tsunami. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of high school and middle school students. Y'all, we are providing a place for them to escape, to pull away from, to be called out from the chaos of this world. And that hits very pointedly this week. We get to create that. We get to be a part of that. You know why? Because they're gonna get sent back and they're gonna make a difference as well. And then the next generation at some point in time is gonna take the reins of what God has used us to do, and he's gonna build on the foundation that we have laid, and it's gonna become something even more than it's been before. That's the picture. That's what's at stake. So the way I wanna close is, I wanna close with this prayer. It's a prayer from the book of Ephesians where Paul is praying for the church, for the community that he's a part of and the community that he's responsible for. So part of what I'm learning as a pastor and having been here for 21 years and trying to think of what the next 21 look like, and I'm figuring in 21 I probably won't be doing this exactly like this. Y'all know that, right? I'll be 71, which is young still, but I just don't anticipate doing this like this. Think about the next 21 years. I'm trying to say, God, what is the heart that you want me to have for our church? How can I learn, like the church that I'm responsible to and the church I'm responsible for, the community I'm responsible to and the community I'm responsible for, how can I sort of enter into this and ask and cultivate a heart, the same heart that you have for our church? And I'm growing in this, but this really spoke to me, and so I want to just read this as our prayer together. I want to consider what would happen in your life if God answered this prayer for you. If you stopped and you said, Jesus is my Lord, right? I am a part of what's happening here. I'm working and pursuing a relationship with Christ. I'm engaged in community. People are increasingly knowing me, and I'm finding myself to be loved and held and helped and find healing. And then I'm able to serve in whatever capacity I'm needed. I'm available for our church, and ultimately I'm beginning to see and understand what I have to offer to the world around me as a part of Christ's body moving back into the world. What if he were to do this in you? And here's Paul's prayer. I keep asking that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, that he may give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you might know him better. What if that happened? What if you knew him better and better and better? I pray that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened, would be awakened, would be opened, in order that you might know what? The hope. That you would never be shaken by the circumstances of this world. That our eyes would be open to see something that's been made available to us that we cannot yet see from where we are. And what that is the riches, I love this, of his glorious inheritance. Where is his glorious inheritance found? Most of us think it's in heaven. In us. Can you believe it? I mean, look around. You don't look like a glorious inheritance, right? This is the treasure. This is the treasure. Like, what do you believe about that? Somehow what God has granted, given, is in us. It's in us together. And then he's given us this incomparably great power for us who dare to believe. That same power is the same power, the same mighty strength that he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead, and he seated him at the right hand in the heavenly realms, far above all rule and all authority and all power and all dominion and every other name that is invoked, not only in the present age, but also in the age to come. That's big. That's power. There is no authority higher than the King of Kings. There is no one else that you appeal to. This is what we have been given. This is what we are being called to learn how to live in and to steward on earth, just like it is. And he says this, and God has placed all things under his feet, and he's appointed him head over everything for the church, which is his body, the fullness of Christ Jesus, who fills everything in every way. Consider this. What if his love and his power, all we just read, filled every area of your life? What if then that same power filled every area from which your life touches? All of a sudden, every space within this place where we reside is no longer governed by fear or pride, but something so subversive and so powerful and so redemptive is at play, all because you and I were willing to become what God has created us and in fact made a way for us to be. How cool would that be? Right, what would you not give for that? Father, I ask that according to your faithfulness, that you are complete and perfect the work that you've begun. 21 years ago, you began something here with this body. We trust that you are faithful today as you were then. So as you continue to grow and build and call and draw, I ask that you would do that very thing. I ask that you would do this, God, for the sake of the work that you are doing in us, that there would be not a single place in our souls and our minds that isn't filled with the fullness of who you are. And God, that you would use us to bring that same reality to the world around us. Father, for those who are here that are far from you or questioning or wrestling or perhaps even disbelieving, you would just draw them to yourself. And we thank you for your patience and your grace. We thank you for your promise. And so, Father, I lift all of these things to you. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who is our King, and he is our Lord. It is in his name that we pray. Amen.